Hello, everyone. Welcome into Above My Pay Grade. My name is Eric. Don't forget to like, comment, share, subscribe. Really helps out the channel. Now, if you saw the thumbnail, Elizabeth Warren is putting pressure on Jerome Powell. She says he wants to eliminate American jobs and put people out of business and put them on unemployment to cut down inflation. She's correct, by the way. But she doesn't talk about the other option. The other option is more spending, which is part of the reason, if not the main reason, why we're in the position we are today with inflation. And what Jerome Powell is really doing, whether you agree with it or not, by him raising rates, government has to shrink spending because more of their spending goes to paying on debt, interest on debt, because if interest rates go up, more of their tax receipts have to go to the debt, right? So it kind of crimps their style, the style of spending indiscriminately. So whether you think what Jerome Powell is doing is right or wrong, raising interest rates definitely makes the government have to spend more or cut spending. One of those two things. And I thought I saw something refreshing from Republican politicians that I wanted to go through, but there was a couple things missing in the analysis. But I wanted to go through this video with you guys, and some of it's refreshing to hear. Some of it is kind of concerning, but let's take a listen.
For coming, I want to thank my colleagues for joining us here. This is, from my standpoint, pretty simple, pretty basic. I view, both Senator Scott and I come from the private sector in business, and we're just used to having financial information and having a pretty disciplined process.
So he's talking about the omnibus bill, which is this big bill, which is 3,000 pages. And on page 2,479, there is $1 million allocated to transgender butterfly research, but you can't really read it before you pass it. And so these massive omnibus bills have all these allocations to special interests and yada yada. And the Democrats want them to pass that, which is interesting because you'll see how Senator Warren, who was kind of making a dig at Jerome Powell, how she votes on it. My guess is she's going to vote yes. Okay, and she's worried about inflation and Jerome Powell having to raise interest rates because of inflation. And so the Republicans are going through these numbers on federal spending. But I liken to the position we're in today. We see the path ahead. There is no more track for the train to go down. So spending more versus spending less, that's just an argument of how fast we go off the tracks. It's not whether we go off the tracks or not, because unfortunately the 31 trillion, we cannot grow our way out of that. It's impossible mathematically. So basically we're arguing about how fast we fall off those tracks. And there's an argument to be made that you want to slow down, because in order for you to transition to something else, if that transition happens very quickly, it's going to cause chaos. But let's see what they say.
Of reviewing it, certainly before we agree to budgets in our business. The analogy would be that we, as 535 members of Congress, we literally are the board of directors of the largest financial entity in the world, and we never talk numbers. I mean, you've got the number here, so it's not a fair question to ask.
Is that surprising for you?
I've been asking colleagues, I've been asking reporters, do you know how much the federal government spent last year?
What if I told you that you can use motion array to improve your videos fast? For example?
And most people I asked look pretty flummoxed. And I said, don't feel bad. It's not your fault. It's because we never talk about it. And so what I've done is I've just prepared this chart that just gives you some basic information. One number I want to point out is the 4.4 trillion. That's what we were spending totally, mandatory and discretionary spending in 2019 before the pandemic hit. Again, we recognized we had a pandemic, and Congress spent all kinds of money. In total, is about $6.4 trillion over 3 years more than the baseline of 2019 spending, 6.4. One of the things that surprised me as I put this chart together, breaking out discretionary versus mandatory spending, is I would have thought all that temporary COVID relief spending would have been discretionary. Once the crisis, once the pandemic passed, that spending would have just gone away. But in fact, only $1 trillion of the $6.4 trillion was allocated to discretionary, and $5.4 trillion was put into mandatory. I don't understand that.
Yeah, I do. People got paid a lot of money to put that in mandatory spending, and if you don't understand mandatory spending, it's something they do not vote on. So it goes into the that's kind of like Social Security, Medicaid, and Medicare. That's not something they argue back and forth about every year. It's just paid. Military spending is discretionary and how much that goes. But like I said, right now they're rearranging chairs on a Titanic to some degree, and they're just arguing about how fast it should sink because, um, like like this gentleman said, they don't talk numbers, and this has been going on for decades. So you can't, just like a credit card, if you have 7, 8 times your earnings in credit card debt, how do you get out of that? You go bankrupt. Um, and the release valve and the release valve for this problem that he's pointing out, which I think is refreshing that he's pointing out numbers, the release valve is going to be the dollar, meaning your purchasing power. That's going to be the release valve because there's one thing that's very bipartisan in Washington, and that is spending. And a lot of people have hope in politicians, and uh, I don't know why, because every single time they're given an option, they choose spending. I'm just trying to warn people. Right now, all they're doing is arguing about how fast we fall off the tracks. We're going to fall off the tracks because we have too much debt. So there has to be a release valve for that debt, and the best way for government to get out of the problem, which is more spending, more mandatory spending, is to print money, which takes your purchasing power away. So you have a choice. What are you going to do about it?
I'm not sure anybody understands that other than a few, budget experts somewhere in the administration or maybe in the appropriations committees. I was shocked by that. The other thing I find pretty shocking, again, we really don't know, what the negotiators are negotiating from a standpoint of discretionary spending. That's what, the omnibus or NECR is just talking about there. But we do know from the latest Treasury report from 2013 that in total, they're estimating 2023 spending will be $6 trillion. So you look at $6 trillion versus 4.4 in just that 4-year time period. Have we literally just increased the baseline spending from 4.4 to $6 trillion, a $1.6 trillion increase, about 36% increase? I mean, if that's the case, we'll never balance the budget. I'll throw 2 more. I know this is a lot of numbers, but let me just throw a couple more out. Had we just...
They're never going to. The budget won't be balanced. And the reason I say that is because we have inflation now. And when we have inflation, the Fed raises interest rates. And we're looking at our interest payments for next year on that 31 trillion being about 1.5 trillion, which is almost triple what it has been in the past. So, and that doesn't add anything to the economy or anything. That's just paying off when we are pulling forward demand by getting into debt. And that doesn't even account for the fact that demand for U.S. treasuries abroad is dropping like a rock. Who was the biggest buyer of U.S. treasuries over the last couple of decades? Russia and China. Do you think they want to still buy U.S. treasuries? They can't afford it, number one. If they're saving in U.S. treasuries and the actual value of their savings is going down, let's say 7% a year because of inflation, they can't afford it. So what are they going to start saving in? Something else, probably gold. Because if they're saving money in treasuries and it's dropping at 5% a year, that's unaffordable. So when balancing a budget, meaning not having deficit spending, my humble opinion, is pipe dream.
It's grown to 4.4 by a factor of population growth plus inflation. That number should be about $4.8 trillion. Okay. Last year, the federal government raised in revenue $4.9 trillion. Isn't that kind of tantalizing from a standpoint that if we exhibited some financial discipline here, that we actually could have in sight a balanced budget? So we wouldn't keep growing our debt where all this deficit spending wouldn't continue to fuel inflation?
All right, so one thing he left out in that analysis, yes, we brought in 4.9 trillion. Where did that money come from? It was record tax revenue. We had an everything bubble, and because of that everything bubble, housing, stock market, crypto, people paid massive amounts in capital gains. Where did that go? The federal government. Are we going to see that during a recession? Absolutely not. So let's say everything he says is true, which it is as far as numbers, and we had a $4.8 trillion budget. Things that are going down, tax receipts are going down because we don't have capital gains during a recession. Things that are going up in government spending, Social Security matched to inflation, Medicare, Medicaid matched to inflation, military spending not matched to inflation, but it is going up, military spending. And most importantly, the interest on our debt is going up. So even if that was at 4.8 trillion of total outlays, so what? Your income has dropped by a third, if not more, from a federal government standpoint. So you see the problem.
One more little factoid to throw out there. Because of inflation, a dollar you all held at the start of the Biden administration is worth less than 88 cents today. We're talking about defense spending. Somewhere we've been told, you haven't seen it in writing, but we've been told about $858 billion worth of defense spending. That's only worth about $750 billion from the start of the Biden administration because of inflation. We're mortgaging our kids' future. This is killing us from a financial standpoint. It's got to stop. This process has to stop, which is why I supported Senator Lee's unanimous consent request yesterday to pass a CR. As much as we all hate CRs, the dysfunction they represent, but pass a CR that gets us into next year, not only to give a Republican House an opportunity to respond to the people that put them in place, but also to give us time to start understanding what these numbers actually mean. And so with that, I'd like to, introduce Senator Lee, who offered that CR request yesterday.
Yeah, isn't it amazing that we have a government that wants to pass a budget without the people who vote on it reading it? I mean, whatever side of the aisle you're on, that's a lot of dysfunction. And it's refreshing to see them talking about numbers, but it's 2022. And yes, I agree with him. We are mortgaging our kids' future. But one thing I don't think they can be totally honest about, maybe they don't understand, is that it's too late. It's too late to save the dollar because of the 31 trillion in debt. You got to cut spending. You gotta. And how do you cut spending and say, hey, deployed soldiers, we can't pay you. Social Security beneficiaries, sorry, we can't pay you. How does that go for a politician? It doesn't go well. So again, they are arguing about how fast we go off the tracks. Slower's better, that's for dang sure, but we are going to fall off the tracks. All right, guys, let me know what you think in the comments below. See y'all in the next one. Peace.